To save my dying sister, I married a billionaire who had only a few months left to live. But the real nightmare began the night I found her medication bottles hidden in her husband and his lavish master bathroom. When I peeled back the pharmacy labels, I realized my sister was not dying from a natural illness. Someone was slowly and deliberately poisoning her. My name is Amara, and I am 30 years old. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe the truth always comes to light. I stood alone in the sprawling master bathroom of my brother-in-law Spencer and my sister Aaliyah. The house was a massive suburban mansion, a true monument to Spencer and his lucrative career as a regional medical supply chain director. Everything in the room screamed excessive wealth, from the imported Italian marble countertops to the heavy gold-plated fixtures. But my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the small amber plastic bottle. Downstairs, the muffled sounds of hushed conversations echoed through the thick hardwood floorboards. Elias Thorne and his corporate lawyers were waiting in the living room with a marriage certificate that would permanently seal my fate. I was supposed to be touching up my makeup and preparing to sell my life away. Instead, my sharp instincts as a forensic auditor had violently kicked in. Something about the timeline of Aaliyah and her rapidly declining health had never made sense to my highly analytical mind. They told our family it was end-stage lupus. They said her kidneys were aggressively failing, and there was nothing left to do but wait for a transplant we simply could not afford. But the math of her specific physical symptoms did not add up to a natural autoimmune disease. I looked down at the amber bottle resting in my sweating palm. The white pharmacy label clearly stated prednisone, which is a common steroid used to treat severe autoimmune diseases. But the edge of the sticker was slightly raised and wrinkled, as if it had been hastily placed over another existing label. My thumbnail caught the rough edge of the top sticker. With a slow, agonizing pull, I peeled the false pharmacy label away. The original manufacturer label underneath was printed with a stark black warning symbol. The bold word printed across the white background made the blood run completely cold in my veins. Thallium. I stopped breathing. The expensive central air conditioning hummed quietly above my head, but I was suddenly dripping with a freezing cold sweat. Thallium is a highly toxic heavy metal. It is a lethal poison. It mimics the exact clinical symptoms of severe autoimmune failure. It destroys the internal organs slowly over time, causing severe hair loss, radiating nerve pain, and eventually total kidney failure. Everything Aaliyah had been suffering through in agonizing pain for the past 8 months was not a tragic act of fate. It was a calculated act of murder. My sister was not sick. She was being systematically poisoned under my very nose. I stared blindly at my own reflection in the massive vanity mirror. My dark eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror. As a senior forensic auditor, I tracked missing millions for a living. I found tiny discrepancies in complex financial spreadsheets that federal criminal investigators missed. But I had completely missed the monster sleeping right next to my own sister, Spencer. The perfect white savior husband who had charmed my entire family was quietly feeding his wife heavy metal poison every single day. Before my spinning mind could even process the next logical step, heavy footsteps pounded down the carpeted hallway. A loud, violent knock rattled the heavy oak door of the bathroom. "Amara, what the hell is taking you so long?" My mother Brenda yelled from the other side of the wood. Her voice was sharp and filled with the usual deep disdain she reserved only for me. I quickly shoved the heavy thallium bottle deep into the bottom of my designer leather purse and zipped it completely shut. I tried to steady my ragged breathing, but my heart was hammering violently against my ribs. I unlocked and slowly opened the door. My mother stood there wearing a tailored designer dress bought with Spencer and his seemingly endless credit cards. She glared at me, her dark eyes flashing with intense impatience and anger. "You are always trying to ruin everything," she hissed, grabbing my arm with a painful tight grip. "Mr. Thorne and his legal team have been waiting in the study for 20 entire minutes. Sign that marriage certificate right now, or you are going to watch your sister die because we cannot afford her kidney transplant. Do you hear me?" You are going to do this for your family. Her cruel words felt like a physical slap across my face. For my entire life, I had been the difficult black sheep of our family. I was the unlovable pragmatic daughter who asked too many uncomfortable questions, while Aaliyah was the beautiful fragile golden child. And now my own mother was practically dragging me down the elegant staircase to sell me off to a 68-year-old dying billionaire just to secure a $5 million upfront payout. A massive payout that was supposedly going directly towards saving Aaliyah and her failing organs. I looked at my mother, desperately wanting to scream the horrific truth about the deadly poison hidden inside my purse. But looking deeply into her cold, demanding eyes, I realized something far more terrifying than the poison itself. She would never, ever believe me over her wealthy, perfect son-in-law. If I spoke up right now, Spencer would simply gaslight me, hide the physical evidence, and my sister would be dead by next week. I had to play his sick game. I smoothed out the fabric of my dress, looked my mother dead in the eye, and walked past her toward the stairs, ready to sign my soul over to the devil. I walked down the grand sweeping staircase, my designer heels sinking silently into the plush white carpet. Every single step felt like walking closer to my own execution. My heavy leather purse bumped against my hip, serving as a terrifying reminder of the deadly secret hidden deep inside its pockets. I bypassed the main living room where Elias Thorne and his corporate legal team were waiting in total silence. Instead, I turned down the long, shadowy hallway toward the east wing. Spencer had completely converted a luxury guest bedroom into a sterile medical facility for Aaliyah. He spared absolutely no expense to make it look like he was trying to save her. When I stepped through the heavy double doors, the sharp clinical smell of bleach and artificial lavender hit me instantly. Aaliyah lay perfectly still in the center of the massive adjustable hospital bed. My beautiful, vibrant younger sister looked like a fragile, fading ghost. Her warm, dark skin was now ashen and gray. Her thick, natural hair was completely gone, replaced by a thin, silk sleeping cap. Expensive medical monitors beeped rhythmically in the background, tracking her failing vital signs. Sitting right beside her and holding her frail hand was Spencer. He was hunched over his broad shoulders, shaking slightly, as if he had been weeping quietly for hours. His blonde hair was perfectly messy, and his blue eyes were bloodshot. It was an absolute masterpiece of a performance designed to manipulate anyone who walked into that room. He looked up when I entered and offered me a tragic, weary smile. "Amara," he whispered, his voice cracking with perfect agonizing timing. "Thank you for coming down. She had a really rough night. Her kidneys are barely functioning, and the doctor said we are running out of time." I gripped the thick leather strap of my purse, my knuckles turning bone white under the pressure. I stared directly at his handsome, perfect face and felt a violent wave of physical nausea wash over me. I did not offer him a comforting hug or a sympathetic nod. Instead, I stood frozen at the foot of the bed and let my cold, analytical audit instincts take over completely. If she is really running out of time, Spencer, why is her premium insurance denying all the recent hospital claims? I asked, my voice dead and completely flat. I reviewed the hospital billing statements you carelessly left on the kitchen counter yesterday morning. You are a highly paid regional director for a massive medical supply chain. She is on your gold-tier corporate health policy. There is absolutely no logical reason a major insurance provider would suddenly bounce claims for standard lupus treatments unless the underlying toxicology reports contradict the original diagnosis. "And what exactly are you giving her anyway?" I pressed, stepping closer to his chair. "Because I just checked her medication tray in the bathroom, and the timeline of these new steroid prescriptions does not make any logical sense at all." Spencer slowly dropped Aaliyah's hand. The tragic, heartbroken husband routine vanished for a fraction of a second, replaced by a cold, hard, terrifying glare. But just as quickly, he smoothed his facial features into an expression of deep, patronizing patience. He stood up to his full height and ran a hand through his hair, sighing heavily, as if he was dealing with an irrational child. Amara, I know you are under a massive amount of stress right now, he said, using that calm, measured tone white men always use when they want to make you sound crazy and hysterical. But you are just a financial auditor, not a nephrologist. You spend your days looking at boring spreadsheets. I spend my days working directly with top-tier medical providers and clinical specialists. Aaliyah is suffering from rapid-onset immunosuppressive nephropathy. Her body is completely rejecting the standard corticosteroid treatments. The insurance company is pushing back because we are trying experimental off-label therapies to save her life. Therapies that are incredibly expensive and notoriously not covered by standard corporate insurance policies. He took a slow, deliberate step toward me, looking down from his tall, intimidating height. I have completely liquidated my personal savings, Amara. I have maxed out all my credit cards trying to keep your sister breathing. I am doing everything humanly possible, and frankly, it is incredibly hurtful that you would come into my own home and interrogate me while my wife is literally dying in front of us. Before I could even open my mouth to respond to his elaborate web of medical lies, my mother pushed past me into the room. She had heard the entire exchange from the hallway. Her face was twisted with absolute disgust, but it was aimed entirely at me. "How dare you!" Brenda hissed, her voice trembling with misplaced rage. "How dare you come in here and attack this poor, devoted man? Spencer has done nothing but love and provide for your sister since the day they met. He is the only reason she is still alive today. Mom, none of his medical explanations add up." I pleaded, turning to face her directly. "The insurance companies are flagging the claims because the blood work does not match a natural autoimmune failure. He is hiding something terrible from us. Stop it right now," Brenda yelled, pointing a sharp manicured finger directly at my face. "You have always been so intensely jealous of your sister's happiness. From the very day she met Spencer, you could not stand the fact that she found a good, wealthy man who treats her like an absolute queen. You have always been a cold-hearted, cynical auditor who only cares about cold, hard numbers. You cannot stand to see real love because you are too bitter and miserable to find it yourself. Stop being so difficult for once in your life and go sign that damn paper." Her cruel words hit me like physical blows to the chest. I looked from my mother's furiously red face to Spencer's quietly triumphant smirk. He had won this round completely. He had successfully isolated me. He knew exactly how my mother operated. She worshipped the ground he walked on because he represented the ultimate societal prize. A wealthy, successful white savior who elevated our family status in the neighborhood. Brenda would rather watch Aaliyah die a slow, agonizing death than admit her perfect son-in-law was a cold-blooded monster. If I pulled the hidden bottle of thallium out of my purse right now, they would not believe a single word I said. Spencer would claim it was a specialized medical compound, or worse, he would claim that I planted it there to frame him because I was jealous. He would call the local police and have me forcibly removed from the property for having a violent mental breakdown. They would cut me off completely, lock me out of the house, and Aaliyah would be dead before the end of the weekend. I was completely trapped in a nightmare. The only way to save my sister was to play along and secure the $5 million. I needed that immense amount of money, and I desperately needed the terrifying power of the Thorn Empire behind me. Only then could I crush Spencer and bypass my mother's blind, willful ignorance. I swallowed the burning lump of pure hatred rising in my throat. I lowered my head submissively, hiding the deadly, dangerous promise shining in my eyes. "You are right," I whispered softly, staring at the floor. "I am sorry, Spencer. I am just really stressed about losing her." Spencer offered a forgiving, condescending nod, playing his role to perfection. "Thank you, Amara. We just need you to be strong and supportive for the family right now." I turned my back on both of them and walked out of the hospital room without another word. I marched straight down the carpeted hallway and stepped into the lavish executive study. Elias Thorne sat in his custom leather wheelchair, a dark mahogany desk resting in front of him. His elite corporate lawyers stood silently by the walls holding gold-plated pens and thick leather binders. The marriage contract lay crisp and white on the polished wood, waiting patiently for my signature. It promised a $5 million upfront wire transfer in exchange for legally binding myself to a dying billionaire. Without reading a single word of the legal jargon, I picked up the heavy gold pen. I did not hesitate for even a second. I pressed the tip to the paper and signed my full name. I sold my soul and my freedom for $5 million. But as the lawyers packed up their briefcases and handed me my copy, I knew one thing for absolute certain. Spencer thought he had outsmarted a bitter, jealous older sister. He had absolutely no idea he had just handed a ruthless forensic auditor the keys to a billion-dollar empire, and I was going to use every single penny of it to completely destroy his life. The wedding took place exactly 48 hours later, in the cold, sterile boardroom of a downtown corporate law firm. There was no white dress and no walking down the aisle. I wore a tailored black suit that matched the dark circles under my eyes. Elias Thorne sat at the head of the long mahogany table in his custom wheelchair. His breathing was shallow and labored, but his dark eyes were sharp and calculating. The officiant read the standard marriage vows, sounding more like a judge handing down a sentence than a man joining two souls. When he asked if I took this man to be my husband, I said I do with the exact same tone I used to verify tax documents. There was no kiss. Elias simply signed the massive stack of legal documents with a gold pen and pushed them across the table to me. My mother and Spencer did not even bother to attend the brief ceremony. They had already received the $5 million wire transfer confirmation that morning. As far as they were concerned, my purpose had been fully served. After the ink dried, a silent driver in a black suit drove us away from the city and toward the massive Thorne estate. The sprawling mansion was hidden behind tall wrought iron gates and acres of dense manicured forest. Elias did not speak a single word to me during the entire hour-long ride. His silence was not oppressive, but rather a mutual acknowledgement of our purely transactional arrangement. When the car finally stopped in front of the grand stone entrance, Elias turned his head slightly to look at me. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy brass key, placing it on the leather seat between us. "That key opens the West Wing," he said, his voice raspy and thin from the cancer destroying his pancreas. "You will have your own private suite of rooms. My nursing staff and security detail will not disturb you unless you request them. We have an understanding, Amara. You are here to secure my assets from my greedy relatives, and I am here to provide you with the financial leverage you require. Do not expect a husband, and I will not expect a wife." I picked up the cold brass key. "I understand completely, Elias," I replied. "I did not want romance or a fairy tale ending. I wanted absolute, unmitigated power." I walked alone through the quiet, echoing halls of the estate until I reached the West Wing. My new bedroom was larger than my entire previous apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private lake. Another woman might have collapsed onto the massive silk bed and cried over the twisted, tragic turn her life had taken. But I did not shed a single tear. Crying was a useless biological response designed to make weak people feel better about their total lack of control. I was not weak. I walked straight past the luxury furniture and set my heavy leather purse on the glass writing desk. I pulled out my sleek silver laptop and opened it. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I logged into my encrypted banking portal. I had authorized the release of $5 million to an escrow account Spencer claimed was managed by the billing department at Johns Hopkins Medical Center. He had provided official-looking invoices on hospital letterhead, complete with routing numbers and patient identification codes. But as a senior forensic auditor, I knew that paper could easily be manipulated. Numbers, however, never lied. I opened my specialized tracking software, a proprietary program I normally use to hunt down hidden assets for corporate embezzlement cases. I entered the exact routing and account numbers Spencer had provided. I bypassed the standard banking interface and dug directly into the Federal Reserve wire system. I sat in the cold, quiet room and watched the green progress bar load on my screen. My heart beat in a slow, steady rhythm. When the final transaction log populated, I leaned forward and stared closely at the raw data. The receiving institution was not a medical facility. The routing number did not belong to Johns Hopkins or any other hospital network in the state. The $5 million had landed in a private wealth management bank located in Delaware. I traced the specific account holder information. It was registered to a limited liability company called Apex Holdings. Delaware is a notorious corporate tax haven. It is the easiest state in the country to set up an anonymous shell company to hide the true identity of the owners. I quickly pulled up the state corporate registry and ran a search on Apex Holdings. The company had been formally incorporated exactly 4 weeks ago. That was just days before Spencer started telling our family that Aaliyah's insurance was suddenly denying her life-saving treatments. I tracked the movement of my $5 million after it hit the Delaware account. The money had not stayed there. Within 24 hours of receiving my wire transfer, the funds had been systematically broken down into smaller amounts and transferred into 3 separate offshore holding accounts in the Cayman Islands. This was a textbook layering technique. It was the exact same method international criminals use to launder dirty money and make it completely untraceable. Spencer was not paying for experimental lupus therapies. He was not buying rare medications or paying expensive specialists to keep my sister alive. He was siphoning cash out of his own family and burying it in untraceable offshore accounts. I thought about the heavy bottle of thallium still sitting at the bottom of my purse. The pieces of the dark puzzle were finally coming together. Spencer was systematically poisoning his beautiful, adoring wife to death. And he was using her slow, agonizing decline to extort millions of dollars from anyone desperate enough to try and save her. I stared at the glowing screen as the cold reality of his greed washed over me. Spencer had always portrayed himself as a high-earning executive, but these offshore transfers told a completely different story. A man who was truly wealthy did not need to run a complex money laundering operation through a Delaware shell company. He was hiding something much bigger than just my $5 million. I opened a new search window and began pulling public financial records for his medical supply corporation. I was going to rip apart his entire life numbers by numbers until I found the exact reason he needed my sister dead. I closed the laptop and looked out the massive window at the dark lake. The game had officially changed. I was no longer a desperate sister begging for a cure. I was the architect of his impending destruction. The sun rose over the private lake, casting a pale gray light into my massive bedroom. I had not slept a single minute. My mind had been racing through complex financial algorithms and offshore routing numbers all night long. I showered and dressed with military precision. I chose a sharply tailored charcoal gray suit and tied my hair back into a tight, severe bun. I was not playing the role of a grieving sister or a subservient new wife today. I was going to war. I gathered the printed financial dossiers I had compiled overnight and walked out of the West Wing, navigating the silent, echoing corridors of the estate. I found the main dining room on the ground floor. It was a cavernous space with a long mahogany table positioned under a massive crystal chandelier. A quiet private chef served me a single cup of black coffee and quietly retreated back to the kitchen. I sat at the far end of the table, opening my physical files to review the amateur laundering structures Spencer was using. I had barely taken my first sip of the bitter coffee when the heavy dining room doors swung open with a violent crash. A young man stormed into the room, his face twisted with arrogant rage. This was Trevor Thorne, the 25-year-old grandson of Elias. He was dressed in a pristine white tennis outfit, wearing a watch that probably cost more than my childhood home. He marched straight down the length of the long table and slammed both of his hands down flat on the polished wood right in front of me. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he demanded, his voice echoing loudly off the high ceiling. "You think you can just slither your way into this house in the middle of the night and steal my inheritance? My grandfather might be losing his mind to cancer, but I am not blind. I know exactly what you are doing. I did not blink. I did not pull back. I simply looked up at him with cold, dead eyes. Trevor sneered, leaning closer so I could smell his expensive cologne. You are nothing but a ghetto gold digger who found a dying old man to exploit. I am calling my legal team this morning to have this ridiculous marriage annulled. You will not see a single penny of the Thorne family money. Pack your cheap bags and get out of my house before I call the estate security and have you thrown out onto the street like the trash you are. His face was flushed red with the thrill of his own perceived power. He was so used to bullying the household staff and intimidating people with his last name. I carefully set my ceramic coffee cup down on its matching saucer, making a soft clinking sound in the quiet room. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger or fear. I reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out a thin manila folder. I placed it flat on the table and slowly slid it across the smooth mahogany surface until it bumped gently against his white tennis shirt. Before you call the estate security, Trevor, you might want to call a very good criminal defense attorney. I said, my voice dangerously calm and flat. Trevor frowned, looking down at the plain folder. What is this garbage? He scoffed. I folded my hands neatly on the table. That is a fully documented forensic audit of the Thorne Family Pediatric Cancer Foundation, I explained smoothly. Specifically, it details the third quarter vendor payments from the past 2 fiscal years. You really should have hired a professional if you were going to embezzle from your own grandfather. Your layering technique is incredibly sloppy. I spent the entire night tracking the offshore accounts of a man who is actually dangerous. Compared to him, you are just a greedy child playing with money you do not understand. The arrogant sneer slowly began to melt off his face, replaced by a sudden sickening pallor. I continued, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. You created 4 fake medical supply vendors and authorized $2 million in charitable grants to those fictitious entities. You then funneled that money into a holding account in the Bahamas to fund your reckless cryptocurrency investments. You used your personal laptop to approve the wire transfers, Trevor. The internet protocol addresses match the exact router location of your luxury penthouse downtown. Did you honestly think no one would ever reconcile the general ledger? Trevor opened the folder with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the highlighted bank statements, the printed data logs, and the exact dates of his fraudulent transfers. His breathing became shallow and panicked. You cannot prove this, he stammered, his voice completely losing its aggressive edge. This is fabricated. I smiled a cold, empty smile. The Federal Bureau of Investigation will not think it is fabricated, I replied. And the Internal Revenue Service will be very interested in the $2 million of undeclared offshore income. You are looking at 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary, Trevor. A low, dry chuckle suddenly broke the tension in the room. We both turned toward the doorway. Elias Thorne was sitting in his motorized wheelchair, his breathing apparatus humming quietly. He rolled slowly into the dining room, his dark eyes fixed on his terrified grandson. A ghetto gold digger. Elias repeated, his raspy voice dripping with absolute contempt. It seems the gold digger is the only person in this family who actually knows how to read a balance sheet. Trevor stumbled backward, dropping the folder onto the floor. Grandfather, I can explain, he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. It was just a temporary loan. I was going to put the money back, I swear. Elias raised a single frail hand, cutting him off completely. Pack your bags, Trevor. Elias commanded, his tone as hard as granite. My security team will escort you off the property in exactly 15 minutes. You are completely cut out of the will, and I am turning that folder over to the district attorney by noon. Get out of my sight before I have you arrested right here in the dining room. Trevor looked from his grandfather to me, his face pale with absolute terror. He turned and sprinted out of the dining room without saying another word. Elias wheeled himself closer to the table until he was sitting directly across from me. He looked at the scattered financial documents on the floor and then looked up at my face. There was no warmth in his eyes, but there was a deep, profound level of respect. I did not ask you to audit my family charities, Amara, he said quietly. I did not do it for you, Elias, I replied, taking another sip of my coffee. I did it because I needed to know exactly how secure your internal networks were. If your grandson could steal $2 million that easily, your entire corporate structure is vulnerable. And right now, I cannot afford any vulnerabilities. I am hunting a man who is much smarter than your grandson. Elias nodded slowly, a grim smile touching the corners of his mouth. You are entirely ruthless, Amara. You do not let emotion cloud your judgment. That is exactly what the Thorn Empire needs to survive after I am dead. Elias pressed a button on the armrest of his wheelchair. His head of private security stepped immediately into the dining room. Give my wife absolute unrestricted administrative access to the entire Thorn corporate financial intelligence network, Elias ordered. Give her the ghost access credentials. Let her use the proprietary tracking software we reserve for hostile corporate takeovers. Give her the private investigators who do not exist on paper. Whatever she asks for, she gets immediately with no questions asked. The security chief nodded respectfully and left the room. Elias looked back at me. You now have the keys to the kingdom, Amara. You have unlimited resources at your fingertips. Go destroy whoever you are hunting. I did not waste another second. I left the dining room and walked straight back to my suite in the West Wing. The ghost access credentials were waiting for me in a secure encrypted email on my laptop. I logged into the Thorn Corporate Financial Intelligence Network. The interface was sleek and terrifyingly powerful. It was a system built exclusively for billionaires to dissect their rivals and manipulate global markets. I typed in the name of the Delaware shell company, Apex Holdings. Within seconds, the system bypassed the standard privacy firewalls that protected anonymous corporate entities. I watched the screen as the corporate veil of Apex Holdings was brutally ripped away. The real names of the managing directors, the hidden stakeholders, and the linked personal bank accounts all populated on my screen in stark white text. There was only one primary beneficiary listed: Spencer. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I dug deeper, pulling the transaction histories connected to his personal social security number. I was expecting to find standard corporate embezzlement or maybe hidden real estate investments. What I found was a chaotic, terrifying black hole of financial ruin. Spencer was not a calculated criminal mastermind. He was a desperate, degenerate gambler. The network pulled his hidden brokerage accounts, and the numbers were staggering. Over the past 3 years, he had been heavily involved in high-risk options trading. Options trading is a brutal game. You are not just buying standard stock, you are betting on the future price of an asset within a specific time frame. It is basically high-stakes gambling disguised as sophisticated investing. He had leveraged himself to the hilt, betting that a major biotech firm would fail its clinical trials. Instead, the trials succeeded and the stock price skyrocketed. Spencer was caught in a massive short squeeze. His broker demanded immediate capital to cover the exponential losses. The market had turned against him violently. I scrolled through pages and pages of devastating losses. He was completely wiped out. His corporate salary as a regional director was just a drop in the bucket compared to the massive debt he had accumulated. I traced the exact timeline of his worst financial failures. 6 months ago, Spencer received a massive margin call from his primary brokerage firm. He owed them over $4 million, and they were threatening to liquidate his remaining assets and contact his employer to garnish his wages. That was the exact same week he first told our family that Ayalea was getting sick. I felt a cold, hollow sensation in the pit of my stomach. I pulled up the routing history for the $5 million I had wired him just a few days ago. The money had bounced from the Delaware shell company to the Cayman Islands and then went straight back into the American banking system directly to his brokerage firm. The $5 million that cost me my freedom. The money that was supposed to buy my sister a fighting chance at a kidney transplant lasted exactly 14 minutes in his account. 14 minutes. That was all my sacrifice was worth to him. The entire $5 million was immediately liquidated to cover his outstanding margin calls and keep him out of federal bankruptcy court. He had not spent a single dime on my sister. He had sold my life to Elias Thorne to pay off his bad stock market bets. Spencer needed cash desperately, so he created a fake medical crisis. But a fake medical crisis would eventually be discovered by real doctors. So he made her genuinely sick. He was poisoning his own wife, slowly destroying her internal organs, so her symptoms would perfectly mimic severe autoimmune failure. It was a brilliant and utterly psychotic plan. As long as she was sick, he could continue to extort money from our family to fund his gambling addiction. And when she finally died, he would play the tragic grieving widower while quietly walking away from his financial disasters. The sheer evil of it all threatened to break my composure. I had to force myself to breathe slowly. He watched her hair fall out. He held her hand while she screamed in agonizing nerve pain. He looked my mother in the eye and accepted her absolute adoration, all while handing Aaliyah a cup of water laced with heavy metal. He thought he was untouchable, wrapped in his expensive suits and his perfectly curated public image. But numbers do not care about your image. Numbers expose the rot underneath. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing data on the screen. I had his motive perfectly documented. I had the financial paper trail proving his fraud. But in a court of law, a smart defense attorney could argue that Spencer simply stole the money out of desperation and that Aaliyah really was dying of lupus. I needed physical proof connecting him directly to the thallium poisoning. I needed to prove he bought the poison and administered it. Without that link, the police could only charge him with financial crimes, and he would probably get out on bail before Aaliyah even made it to the hospital. I needed to tie the heavy metal directly to his hands. Thallium is not something you order on the regular internet. It is an industrial chemical historically used in rat poison and electronic components. Its toxicity is so severe that its sale is strictly monitored by environmental and federal agencies in the United States. Spencer was a director of a medical supply chain. He had access to pharmaceutical distributors and clinical warehouses. He was using his professional credentials to bypass the standard red tape. I opened a new search window on the Thorne network. I began cross-referencing Spencer's credit card statements with dark web chemical suppliers and unregulated industrial manufacturers. I searched through his corporate expense reports, looking for any unusual purchases masked as medical supplies. My eyes burned from staring at the bright screen, but I refused to blink. Every passing hour meant Aaliyah was ingesting more of that deadly poison. I thought about my mother blindly defending him and standing by while my sister withered away. I let the cold anger fuel my focus. I was going to find the supplier. I was going to find the exact moment Spencer crossed the line from a desperate gambler to a cold-blooded murderer. I just needed one slip-up, one careless transaction to seal his fate forever. I realized that digging through Spencer's corporate expense reports was going to take days, and I simply did not have that kind of time. Aaliyah was getting weaker by the hour. If Spencer was using a medical professional to bypass federal regulations for the thallium, he would not leave a direct paper trail on his own credit cards. He would use an intermediary. I needed to speak directly to the man who was officially overseeing my sister's rapid physical decline. I opened the digital medical file I had secretly copied from Spencer's home office. The primary physician listed was Dr. Thomas Montgomery, a highly sought-after private concierge doctor who catered exclusively to the ultra-wealthy elite of our city. His retaining fee alone was $50,000 a year just to have his personal cell phone number on speed dial. It was a ridiculous sum of money for a man drowning in options trading debt to pay unless that doctor was providing a very specific illegal service. I picked up my phone and booted up a secure audio recording program on my laptop. I routed the call through an encrypted server so every single word would be captured and preserved. I dialed the direct private number listed on the medical file. The phone rang 3 times before a man answered. His voice was slick and overly confident. "Dr. Montgomery speaking," he answered, sounding slightly out of breath. "Dr. Montgomery, my name is Amara," I began, keeping my voice perfectly level and professional. "I am Alaya's older sister. I am calling to discuss the discrepancies in her recent blood work and the denial of her insurance claims for the off-label steroid treatments you prescribed." There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his tone had completely shifted from professional courtesy to dripping condescension. "Ah, yes, the sister." He sighed heavily. "Spencer warned me you might try to interfere." "Listen, Amara, is it? I understand that dealing with a family tragedy is difficult. It is very common for relatives to experience denial when faced with end-stage lupus." "I am not in denial, doctor," I replied, my grip tightening on the phone. "I am a forensic auditor. I have reviewed the itemized medical billing and the pharmacological timeline. The aggressive immunosuppressants you are prescribing do not align with her lack of traditional lupus markers. The insurance company flagged the claims for a reason. I need you to explain exactly what experimental therapy you are supposedly administering, because the math does not add up." He let out a sharp, patronizing laugh. "Sweetheart, let me stop you right there," he said, his voice dripping with the kind of casual racism and sexism I had dealt with my entire corporate career. "You are just an accountant. You punch numbers into a calculator for a living. Immunology is an incredibly complex science. It is not something you can just figure out by looking at a spreadsheet. You people always want to question the medical experts when things do not go your way." My blood boiled at the phrase "you people," but I forced myself to remain completely silent. Letting him talk was the best way to let him hang himself. "Spencer is moving mountains to keep your sister comfortable," he continued, his tone growing more aggressive. "He is an exceptional husband. He understands the sophisticated clinical trials we are running. Maybe you should stick to balancing checkbooks and let the real doctors handle the complex science of saving Ialia's life. Do not call this number again unless it is a medical emergency." He was about to hang up, but my highly trained ears caught something crucial in the brief silence between his arrogant words. It was incredibly faint at first, masked by the sound of him walking, but then it grew slightly louder as he passed by what sounded like an open doorway. It was a distinct mechanical whirring followed by a sharp, repetitive electronic chiming sound. Then came the unmistakable clatter of heavy metal tokens hitting a metal tray and the low, loud murmur of a crowded, windowless room. I had audited the financial records of 2 major gaming resorts in Las Vegas early in my career. I knew exactly what that specific combination of sounds meant. Dr. Montgomery was not in a hospital. He was not in a private clinic or a sterile medical laboratory. He was standing on the gaming floor of a high-stakes casino in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. The sudden realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. Dr. Montgomery was not just an arrogant racist physician. He was a degenerate gambling addict just like Spencer. I quickly ended the call and saved the encrypted audio file to my secure hard drive. Everything suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. Spencer did not need to buy thallium on the dark web and risk getting caught by federal authorities. He had a desperate, corrupt medical doctor on his payroll. Dr. Montgomery was using his license and his secure medical supply channels to procure the heavy metal poison for Spencer. In exchange, Spencer was likely paying the doctor massive amounts of cash under the table, or perhaps sharing insider trading tips to help the doctor cover his own massive gambling debts. They were 2 desperate men feeding off each other. Spencer needed a doctor to write fraudulent prescriptions, falsify Ialia's medical charts, and physically provide the poison. Montgomery needed a wealthy executive to fund his high-stakes casino habit. They had built a perfect closed loop of murder and extortion, and my beautiful innocent sister was the collateral damage caught right in the middle of their sick financial game. I played the audio recording back, isolating the background noise and amplifying the casino sounds. The arrogance in his voice when he called me sweetheart and told me to stick to balancing checkbooks echoed through my silent bedroom. White men like Spencer and Dr. Montgomery always made the exact same fatal mistake. They assumed that because I was a black woman, I was automatically less intelligent, less capable, and easily intimidated by their professional titles. They thought their privilege made them invisible. But privilege leaves a very distinct paper trail. I opened the Thorn Financial Intelligence Network once again. This time I did not search for Spencer. I typed in Thomas Montgomery. I pulled his private banking records, his mortgage statements, and his credit history. Within 10 minutes, I found exactly what I was looking for. Dr. Montgomery was heavily indebted to a private lending firm known for funding high rollers at a major offshore casino. He was drowning in over $2 million of unregulated gambling debt. Spencer was not just manipulating a doctor, he basically owned him. I leaned back and stared at the twin dossiers on my computer screen. I had the husband who was administering the poison, and the doctor who was supplying it and covering it up. They thought they had committed the perfect crime, but they had never been hunted by someone with unlimited resources and absolutely nothing left to lose. I closed the laptop and picked up my phone. It was time to stop gathering information and start setting the trap. I drove my black SUV back to Spencer's suburban mansion the next afternoon. I had purposefully waited until I knew my mother was out attending her weekly country club luncheon. The house was dead quiet when I unlocked the front door with my spare key. I walked past the sterile medical room in the east wing where Ayalea was heavily sedated and sleeping. I did not stop to look at her. If I looked at my sister right now, I might lose my cold, calculating edge. Instead, I headed straight down the hallway toward the heavy mahogany doors of Spencer's private home office. I turned the brass handle and pushed the door open without knocking. Spencer was sitting behind his massive custom desk, staring intensely at a multi-monitor trading setup. He quickly minimized the screens as soon as I walked in, but I had already seen the glowing red lines of his failing stock charts. He immediately shifted his posture, letting his shoulders slump to play the exhausted, devoted husband. "Amara," he sighed, rubbing his temples in mock exhaustion. "What are you doing here? I thought you were settling into your new life at the Thorn estate. Ayalea is sleeping and I really need to get some work done to pay these medical bills." I walked inside and quietly pushed the heavy wooden door shut behind me. The lock clicked into place with a sharp metallic snap. I did not sit down in the plush leather guest chair. I stood directly in front of his desk, looking down at him. "How is Apex Holdings doing these days, Spencer?" I asked, my voice dead and completely flat. His hand froze halfway to his coffee mug. The silence in the room suddenly became thick and suffocating. He slowly lowered his hand and looked at me. His blue eyes darted rapidly, trying to figure out exactly how much I knew. "I have no idea what you are talking about," he said, keeping his voice carefully neutral. I placed both of my hands flat on his pristine desk and leaned forward. "I am talking about the Delaware Shell Company you incorporated exactly 4 weeks ago," I replied smoothly. "I am talking about the $5 million I wired you that was supposed to go to Johns Hopkins Hospital, but instead went straight to your offshore accounts to cover your massive margin calls. You are drowning in options trading debt, Spencer. And since you and Dr. Montgomery both share a severe gambling addiction, I imagine he was more than happy to help you bypass federal regulations to procure the thallium to poison my sister." Spencer stared at me for a long, terrifying moment. The fake exhaustion, the forced empathy, the tragic husband routine, it all completely vanished. His facial muscles relaxed, and a slow, dark smirk spread across his face. He leaned back in his expensive ergonomic chair and let out a low, cold laugh. He did not deny a single word. He did not panic or beg for mercy. Instead, he looked at me with the absolute supreme confidence of a man who believed the entire world was built to protect him. "You really are an exceptional auditor, Amara," he said, his voice dropping the patronizing warmth and revealing the arrogant monster underneath. I have to admit, I am genuinely impressed. I thought you would just hand over the cash and fade away into your miserable, loveless marriage. But you actually dug into the offshore routing. Congratulations! You solved the puzzle. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my face remained carved from stone. You are slowly murdering my sister for insurance money and gambling funds, I stated coldly. I have the complete financial paper trail. I am going to completely destroy you. Spencer let out another sharp laugh and slowly stood up, leaning his knuckles on the desk so he was looking down at me. Destroy me, he mocked, shaking his head. With what, Amara? A few complicated spreadsheets. You have absolutely no physical proof that I have ever harmed my wife. All you have is a theory about money and a doctor who will swear under oath that Aaliyah is dying of aggressive lupus. He walked slowly around the edge of the desk, closing the distance between us. He used his height to tower over me, weaponizing his physical presence and his absolute privilege. Let us play out your little fantasy, Amara, he whispered, his tone dripping with venom. Let us say you go to the police right now. Who do you think society is going to believe, Amara? A successful white executive weeping for his sick wife, or an angry, bitter black woman trying to steal her dying billionaire husband's money? He took another step closer, forcing me to look up into his cold, dead eyes. The police will look at me and see a grieving hero, he continued softly. They will look at you and see a jealous, hysterical woman having a mental breakdown. Your own mother hates you. Aaliyah is terrified of you. If you make one single accusation against me, I will call the authorities and have you committed for a psychiatric hold. I will tell them the stress of your forced marriage has made you completely delusional. And my good friend Dr. Montgomery will gladly sign the medical paperwork to lock you away in a padded room. The sheer audacity of his threat hung in the quiet office. He was entirely correct about the social dynamics, and he knew it. He knew my mother would fiercely defend him. He knew the legal system historically protected men who looked exactly like him and punished women who looked exactly like me. He thought his privilege was an impenetrable shield. You are a psychotic monster, I said softly, refusing to break eye contact or take a single step backward. And you are entirely powerless in my house, he replied, his smirk returning. You gave me $5 million to clear my immediate debts, and soon I will have the life insurance payout when Aaliyah finally succumbs to her tragic illness. You funded my freedom, Amara. Thank you for your generous contribution to my portfolio. Now get out of my office before I call the police and tell them you are trespassing and threatening my family. I looked at the smug, arrogant smile plastered across his face. My blood was screaming for me to grab the heavy brass paperweight on his desk and smash it into his perfect jaw. But I was not a violent amateur. I was a professional auditor, and I knew that revealing your entire hand was the fastest way to lose the war. He thought he had won because he controlled the narrative inside this house. He had no idea the kind of hell I was preparing to unleash on him from the outside. I did not say another word. I simply turned my back on him and walked slowly toward the door. I opened it and stepped out into the hallway, hearing his low, triumphant chuckle follow me out. He thought he had completely broken my spirit. He thought I was walking away in total defeat. He had absolutely no idea that his arrogant confession was exactly what I needed to solidify my resolve. I was going to take everything from him. But first, I had to face the two women who had enabled this monster to thrive. I pulled my phone from my pocket and walked down the hallway toward the medical wing to wake up my sister. I pushed open the heavy door to the East Wing guest room that had been converted into a sterile medical facility. The heavy scent of artificial lavender and clinical antiseptic immediately filled my lungs. The room was kept painfully cold to keep my sister's fever down. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound breaking the suffocating silence. I walked slowly toward the massive adjustable bed. Aaliyah looked even worse than she had yesterday. Her skin was ashen, and her eyes were sunken deep into her skull. She was hooked up to an intravenous drip that I now knew was likely flushing her system with just enough fluids to keep her alive while the heavy metals destroyed her organs. I sat down in the padded chair next to her bed and placed the thick stack of printed financial documents on the mattress. I reached out and gently touched her frail shoulder. "Aaliyah," I whispered softly. "Wake up, sweetie. I need to talk to you. It is incredibly important." She stirred slowly, her eyelids fluttering open. She looked confused and exhausted. "Amara?" She mumbled, her voice weak and raspy. "What are you doing here? Where is Spencer?" "He was just here. He is down the hall," I replied, keeping my voice as gentle and steady as possible. "Aaliyah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I know you are in a massive amount of pain, and I know you are scared. But you have to look at these papers. I spent the entire night tracing the money that I gave Spencer for your kidney transplant." Aaliyah frowned, shifting uncomfortably against the pillows. "What do you mean, tracing the money?" she asked defensively. "Spencer paid the hospital. He told me the wire transfer cleared this morning. He told me we are finally on the donor list." "He lied to you, Aaliyah," I said, my heart breaking as I watched her desperate hope. I pulled the top spreadsheet from the stack and held it up. "This is a routing log from the Federal Reserve. The $5 million did not go to Johns Hopkins. It went to an anonymous offshore shell company in Delaware called Apex Holdings. And from there, it went directly to a high-risk brokerage firm to cover Spencer's massive stock market debts. He lost millions in options trading, Aaliyah. He is completely broke." Aaliyah stared at the paper blankly and then shook her head, refusing to process the numbers. "You are lying," she whispered. "You do not know what you are talking about. Spencer is an executive. He is brilliant with money. He sold his own car to pay for my treatments last month. He sold his car because the bank was about to repossess it." I pushed, pressing the papers closer to her. "Aaliyah, please look at the dates. The week he got his first massive margin call from his broker was the exact same week you started feeling sick. It is not lupus. You do not have an autoimmune disease. He is using your doctor to slowly poison you with a heavy metal called thallium. Dr. Montgomery is a gambling addict who owes millions to an offshore casino. Spencer is paying him to write fake charts and supply the poison." For a moment, total silence hung in the cold room. I thought the logic had finally broken through her brainwashing. I thought the sheer undeniable weight of the financial evidence would snap her out of the illusion. Instead, her face twisted into an expression of pure, hateful rage. The golden child programming overrode her basic survival instincts. She weakly raised her arm and swatted violently at the stack of papers. The heavy spreadsheets scattered across the white blankets and fluttered to the floor. "Shut up!" she hissed, her voice suddenly sharp and venomous. "Shut your mouth right now, Amara." I recoiled in shock. "Aaliyah, I am trying to save your life," I pleaded. "He is murdering you. He is saving my life," she screamed, her chest heaving with misplaced anger. "He has been sitting by my bed for 8 months holding my hand while I vomit. He bathes me. He feeds me. He loves me. You are just a bitter, miserable bitch who cannot stand the fact that I got a perfect fairy tale marriage and you got absolutely nothing." Her words were like a knife twisting in my stomach, but I refused to back down. "Aaliyah, you are blindly defending a man who views you as an ATM," I begged. "He is going to collect a life insurance payout when you die. Please, just let me take you to a real hospital right now. Let me get an independent blood test." "You have always been jealous of me," she cried, her voice growing louder and more hysterical. "Ever since we were kids, you hated that Mom loved me more. You hated that I was pretty and you were just the angry smart girl. You hated that I married a wealthy white man who treated me like a princess. And now you sold yourself to a dying old billionaire just to get some money, and you are projecting your pathetic, miserable life onto my husband." She did not want the truth. She wanted the beautiful, comfortable lie. She would rather die wrapped in the delusion of Spencer's perfect love than survive and admit that her older sister was right and her husband was a monster. "Get out!" Aaliyah shrieked, her eyes wide and wild. She started gasping for air, grabbing her own throat and thrashing against the pillows. The heart monitor next to her bed began to beep rapidly, sensing her sudden spike in heart rate. She was intentionally hyperventilating, forcing her weakened body into a severe panic attack to end the conversation. "Spencer!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. "Spencer, help me! She is trying to hurt me!" The door to the bedroom flew open and slammed against the wall. Spencer rushed into the room, playing the role of the frantic, terrified husband. He pushed roughly past me and leaned over the bed, wrapping his arms around Aaliyah. "Shh, baby, I am here," he cooed, stroking her bald head. "I am right here. What happened?" "She is lying," Aaliyah sobbed, burying her face into his expensive shirt. "Amara is making up terrible lies about you. She has fake papers. She wants to ruin our marriage. Make her leave Spencer. Please make her go away." Spencer looked up from Aaliyah's shoulder. He stared directly at me. His face was twisted into an expression of deep, fake concern for his wife, but his cold blue eyes were dancing with absolute victory. He let out a slow, soft smirk that only I could see. He knew exactly how deeply he had brainwashed her. He knew I had completely lost the battle. "I think you need to leave right now, Amara," he said, his voice thick with false authority. "You are severely stressing her out. I will not let your toxic jealousy endanger my wife's failing health. If you ever come near her with these psychotic conspiracy theories again, I will have a restraining order filed against you by the end of the day." I stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the scattered financial papers on the floor. I looked at my sister, clinging desperately to the very man who was actively murdering her. There was absolutely nothing left to say. Logic and evidence were entirely useless against a lifetime of golden child conditioning. I realized in that freezing cold room that I could not save Aaliyah by asking for her permission. I had to save her by total, absolute force. I turned around and walked out of the room without looking back, leaving the papers on the floor. I walked down the long carpeted hallway, the sound of my sister's panicked sobbing echoing behind me. The gloves were officially off. I pushed through the heavy mahogany front doors and stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun. The heat of the driveway radiated through the thin soles of my shoes. My heart was pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I reached for the handle of my black SUV, just wanting to get back to the Thorne estate to plan my next move, when I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. "Amara, wait right there." "Wait." It was my mother. She had just pulled into the driveway in her pristine white Mercedes. She stepped out of the car wearing her pastel country club attire, a massive sun hat casting a dark shadow over her face. She marched toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She did not look worried, she looked furious. I stood perfectly still and watched her approach. I expected her to yell at me for upsetting her precious golden child. I expected her to repeat Spencer's lies. But what came out of her mouth next was the single most horrifying revelation of my entire life. "Spencer just texted me that you are harassing them about the wire transfer," my mother hissed, stopping mere inches from my face. "I told you to drop this, Amara. I told you to leave them alone." I stared at her, trying to process the fact that Spencer had immediately tattled to her. "Mom, he did not pay the hospital," I said, my voice strained but desperate. "He routed the $5 million to a shell company in Delaware. He used it to pay off his massive stock market debts. He is flat broke, Mom, and he is poisoning Aaliyah to hide it." My mother did not gasp. She did not look shocked. She did not clutch her pearls or demand to see the proof. Instead, she rolled her eyes and let out a long, exasperated sigh. "I know about the money, Amara," she said coldly. The world seemed to stop spinning. The suburban birds chirping in the oak trees faded into absolute silence. I felt the blood drain completely out of my face. "You know," I whispered, my voice barely functioning. "Of course I know," she snapped, waving her hand dismissively. "Spencer came to me crying weeks ago. He told me he made some bad investments. He was terrified he was going to lose the house and that Aliyah would be put out on the street. He is a proud man, Amara. He did not want to look like a failure." I could not breathe. "You knew he was stealing the money to cover his gambling debts, and you still forced me to marry a dying man to get it?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of pure horror and rising rage. "Spencer gives this family status." My mother practically spat the words at me, her eyes flashing with a desperate, ugly pride. "Look at this neighborhood, Amara. Look at this beautiful home. He gave your sister a life we could never have afforded on our own. He takes me to the country club. His friends are judges and politicians. He elevates us. So what if he made a financial mistake? Men make financial mistakes all the time. He is under a lot of pressure trying to provide for your sister. He is not providing for her," I screamed, losing my composure for the very first time. "He is murdering her. The lupus is fake, Mom. He is feeding her thallium. He is making her sick so he can collect a life insurance payout." "Stop being so dramatic," my mother yelled back, slapping her hand against the hood of my SUV. "You have always been so jealous of the fact that he chose your sister over a loud, difficult woman like you. Aaliyah is sick because she has a weak constitution. She has always been delicate. Spencer is doing the best he can." I stared into the eyes of the woman who had given birth to me, and I finally saw the absolute rotting truth of her soul. She was deeply, profoundly addicted to the proximity to whiteness and wealth that Spencer provided. He was the ultimate trophy, a wealthy white executive who validated her worth to the rest of the world. She was so terrified of losing that status, of going back to being just an ordinary black woman from the wrong side of the tracks, that she was willing to sacrifice her own daughter's life to keep the illusion intact. She would rather watch Aaliyah slowly wither away and die wrapped in expensive silk sheets than admit that her perfect white son-in-law was a broke, degenerate murderer. "You have billionaire money now, Amara," she continued, adjusting her expensive handbag on her shoulder. "You married Elias Thorne. You are richer than all of us combined. So stop being a petty, vindictive bitch over $5 million and keep your mouth shut. Go back to your mansion and let your sister live out her final days in peace with a husband who actually loves her." She turned her back on me and started walking toward the front door of the house, completely dismissing my existence, just like she had done my entire life. I did not cry. I did not scream after her. The deep, agonizing wound that I had carried inside my chest since childhood, the desperate, aching need for my mother's love and approval, suddenly stopped hurting. It did not heal. It simply died. The emotional cord connecting me to this family snapped completely, severing me from their toxic orbit forever. I opened the door of my SUV and climbed inside. I gripped the leather steering wheel, my hands perfectly steady. I had spent my entire life trying to protect my sister from the harsh realities of the world. I had sacrificed my freedom, my future, and my own happiness to save her. But they did not want to be saved. They wanted to live in their sick, twisted fairy tale, even if it ended in a graveyard. I started the engine. The low growl of the motor filled the silent driveway. I was no longer a desperate sister trying to rescue a victim. I was a forensic auditor with unlimited billionaire resources, and I had just been given the ultimate green light. Spencer thought he had won because he controlled the narrative inside that house. My mother thought she had won because she successfully bullied me into silence. They had absolutely no idea what I was capable of. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the neighborhood, leaving their manicured lawns and their beautiful lies behind me. I was not going back to the Thorne estate to hide. I was going back to prepare for a slaughter. I was going to take everything from Spencer: his money, his freedom, his pristine public image. And when I was finished, I was going to watch my mother lose the only thing she actually loved, her precious status. The time for gathering evidence was over. It was time to drop the guillotine. The drive back to the Thorne estate was a blur of highway lines and setting sun. I did not turn on the radio. The silence inside the car was absolute, matching the newfound emptiness inside my chest. For 30 years, I had carried the heavy, crushing weight of trying to earn my mother's love and protect a sister who resented my very existence. I had spent my entire life jumping through their impossible hoops, trying to prove that I was worthy of a seat at their table. Now that weight was completely gone. In its place was something cold and sharp. It felt like a weapon forged from pure ice. I pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of the estate. The security cameras scanned my license plate, and the heavy gates swung open silently, granting me access to a fortress of unimaginable wealth. I parked the SUV near the grand entrance and walked up the stone steps. The evening air was growing cold, but I did not feel it. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped into the sprawling foyer. The house was quiet, the staff moving like invisible ghosts through the corridors. I intended to go straight to the West Wing to begin drafting the legal framework for Spencer's destruction. But a voice called out from the dark mahogany library to my left. "Come in here, Amara." It was Elias. I turned and walked into the cavernous room. The walls were lined with thousands of leather-bound books, and a large fire was crackling in the massive stone fireplace. Elias was sitting in his motorized wheelchair parked near the warmth of the flames. He looked frailer than he had yesterday. The pancreatic cancer was aggressively consuming him from the inside out, leaving his skin thin and sallow. But his eyes were entirely alive. They were dark, piercing, and impossibly sharp. He watched me closely as I walked across the oriental rug and stopped in front of him. He did not ask how my day was. He did not ask if I was okay. He simply stared at my face, studying the subtle changes in my posture and the dead expression in my eyes. "You found it?" he stated, his raspy voice breaking the quiet crackle of the fire. "You found the absolute worst possible truth, and it broke you. They broke me a long time ago." "Elias?" I replied, my voice monotone and hollow. "Today they just finally severed the last remaining thread. My mother knows her son-in-law is stealing from us to pay his gambling debts. She knows he is poisoning my sister. But she would rather let her own daughter die than lose the social status that his white privilege brings to her country club life. And my sister would rather die in his arms than admit I was right. They made their choice." Elias leaned back in his leather wheelchair, steepling his thin fingers together. "Family is the greatest liability a person can possess," he murmured, staring into the fire. "We are biologically programmed to protect people who do nothing but drain our resources and betray our trust. Look at my grandson Trevor. He shares my DNA, but he is a parasite. He would gladly unplug my life support if it meant he could get his hands on my bank accounts a few months early." He slowly turned his head to look back at me. His gaze was heavy and filled with dark intent. "When you first walked into this house, Amara, you were just a desperate woman trying to buy a miracle for a family that hated you. You were smart, but you were still chained to your emotions. I look at you right now, and I do not see that woman anymore. I see someone who is entirely empty. I see someone who is ready to burn the entire world down. I am going to completely destroy him." "Elias," I said quietly, "I am going to strip away every single thing that gives him power. His money, his reputation, his freedom. I am going to leave him with absolutely nothing." Elias nodded slowly, a grim smile touching his pale lips. "Good," he whispered. "But $5 million and a few forensic audits will not be enough to crush a man who has the medical establishment and societal privilege protecting him. If you want to completely obliterate him, you need a machine. You need an empire." Elias pressed a button on his armrest, moving his wheelchair closer to where I stood. He reached out with a trembling hand and gestured to the sprawling room around us, the symbol of his lifetime of ruthless corporate conquest. "I am dying, Amara," he said bluntly. "My doctors give me 4 months if I am lucky. My board of directors is already circling like vultures, preparing to carve up my life work the second my heart stops beating. My relatives are fighting over the scraps. I built this empire from the ground up as a black man in a world that wanted to see me fail. I had to be twice as smart and 10 times as ruthless just to get my foot in the door. I refused to let everything I built be dismantled by weak, greedy fools who never had to fight for a single dollar." He locked his dark eyes onto mine. "Your blood family discarded you. They threw you to the wolves to protect a monster. So I am making you a new proposition. Use my empire to crush them. Take the full weight of the Thorn Corporation and drop it directly onto your enemies. Use my lawyers, my private investigators, my holding companies. Play God with their miserable lives. Show them what real power looks like." I stared at the dying billionaire, trying to process the magnitude of what he was saying. "Why would you give me that kind of power?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because I need an heir who is as ruthless as I am," he replied, his voice suddenly strong and commanding. "I need someone who understands the true, brutal nature of power. If you can prove to me that you have the stomach to completely destroy the people who hurt you without hesitation and without mercy, I will rewrite my final will tonight. I will not just give you the $5 million, Amara. I will leave you the entire Thorn Corporation. You will become the sole chairwoman of a multi-billion-dollar global syndicate." The sheer gravity of his offer hung heavily in the warm air of the library. He was offering me the ultimate weapon. He was offering to transform me from a discarded scapegoat into one of the most powerful women in the country. But the price was absolute ruthlessness. There could be no turning back, no moments of weakness or forgiveness. I had to become the very thing my family always accused me of being: a cold, calculating monster. I had to be willing to tear down the walls of their comfortable delusions and expose the ugly, rotting core of their perfect suburban existence. I thought about my sister screaming at me to get out of her room, blaming me for a lifetime of perceived slights. I thought about my mother turning her back on me in the driveway, choosing the comfort of a country club membership over the life of her youngest daughter. I thought about Spencer's arrogant smirk as he stood in his home office, completely confident that his privilege would shield him from any consequences. He thought society would never believe a bitter black woman over a successful white executive. He was about to find out what happened when that bitter black woman suddenly owned the very society he relied on. I looked down at Elias Thorne. The ice in my chest solidified into an unbreakable diamond. I did not feel fear or apprehension. I only felt a terrifying absolute clarity. "Tell your lawyers to start drafting the new will, Elias," I said, my voice echoing with terrifying certainty. "And tell your security chief I need a team of elite private investigators assigned to me immediately. I want to look into Spencer's life insurance policies. If he is murdering his wife for money, he definitely took out massive policies on her life right before she got sick. I want to know exactly how much money he thinks my sister is worth dead." Elias smiled, a genuine chilling smile that reached his tired eyes. The Devil's Alliance was officially sealed. I had walked into this sprawling estate as a pawn in a twisted family game, but I was going to walk out as a queen ready to execute the most flawless destruction they had ever seen. The next morning, I sat at the head of the long mahogany table in the private legal war room of the Thorne estate. Elias was not present. He had given me complete authority. 6 of the most expensive corporate attorneys in the country sat around me. They wore custom suits and possessed the cold, calculated demeanor of legal assassins. I slid a thin dossier across the table to the lead attorney, a man named Vance, who had a reputation for destroying Fortune 500 companies over lunch. "I need you to tear apart the National Insurance Registry," I told him, my voice steady and commanding. "I am looking for any high-yield life insurance policies taken out on my sister Aaliyah within the last 12 months. Vance did not ask questions. He did not offer platitudes about my sick sister. He simply nodded and opened his encrypted laptop. When you have the financial backing of a multi-billion-dollar empire, legal barriers simply evaporate. Privacy laws and waiting periods do not apply to men like Elias Thorne. Within 3 hours, Vance's team had bypassed the standard underwriting firewalls and accessed the Federal Clearinghouse for life insurance data. The results were terrifyingly precise and thoroughly sickening. Vance turned his laptop screen toward me. The harsh blue light reflected in my eyes. Spencer had not just purchased one policy. He had purchased 3 separate maximum yield life insurance policies across 3 different major national carriers. He spread them out intentionally to avoid triggering the automated fraud algorithms that flag massive sudden coverage amounts for single individuals. The first policy was for $5 million. The second was for $4.5 million. The third was for $5.5 million. The total payout upon my sister's death was a staggering $15 million. $15 million. I stared at the glowing numbers on the screen, feeling a cold wave of pure revulsion wash over me. My beautiful, vibrant sister was worth exactly $15 million in cold, hard cash to the man who claimed to love her. I leaned closer to the screen, studying the exact dates of the policy originations. The first premium was paid exactly 2 weeks before Aaliyah experienced her very first mysterious symptom. He had laid the financial groundwork for her death before he ever handed her the first microscopic dose of thallium. "Pull the original signed documents," I instructed Vance, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "I want to see the physical signatures on those contracts right now." Vance tapped the keyboard, and the high-resolution scan documents populated on the screen. I stared at the bottom line of the first contract. There was my sister's signature. But it was completely wrong. I had known Aaliyah for my entire life. I had watched her write thousands of times. Her signature was a beautiful sweeping cursive with a distinct loop on the letter A. The signature on this binding legal document was stiff and jagged. The pressure of the pen strokes was entirely too heavy for a woman who was naturally left-handed. As a forensic auditor, I had examined countless forged checks and falsified tax documents in my career. This was a clumsy, arrogant forgery. Spencer had not even bothered to trace it properly. He simply scribbled a rough approximation of her name, believing that no one would ever question a grieving wealthy husband after his wife succumbed to a tragic natural illness. "He forged her signature," I said, pointing to the screen. "She never knew these policies existed. He set up a guaranteed $15 million payday, and then he hired a corrupt doctor to make sure she died slowly enough to make it look like aggressive lupus. It was a brilliant dark strategy. If she dies from a documented autoimmune failure, the insurance companies will not mandate a toxicological autopsy. They will not look for heavy metals in her blood. They will just look at the doctor's falsified charts, sign the massive checks, and Spencer will walk away, a very wealthy man completely free of his gambling debts." Vance adjusted his expensive wire-rimmed glasses and looked at me with cold professional detachment. "This is textbook federal insurance fraud, Madam Chairwoman," he stated calmly, using my new title for the very first time. "Combined with the evidence of heavy metal poisoning, it is premeditated murder. We can hand this entire file over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation today. They will raid his house and arrest him by nightfall." I looked away from the glowing screen and stared out the large window at the sprawling green lawns of the estate. Handing the file to the FBI was the logical legal thing to do, but it was not the right thing to do. If the authorities arrested him quietly on a Tuesday afternoon, he would simply call a high-powered defense attorney. He would use his white privilege to manipulate a jury. My mother would drain her savings to pay his legal fees, and they would spin a narrative about a loving husband making desperate mistakes to save his dying wife. He would paint me as a jealous sister trying to frame him. The media would eat it up, and society would give him the benefit of the doubt, just like they always did. "No," I whispered, turning back to face the legal team. If we arrest him quietly, he still keeps his dignity. He still keeps his perfect public image and the blind loyalty of my mother. I am not just going to send him to prison, Vance. I am going to completely annihilate him. I want him to lose everything in front of the exact same society he uses as a shield. I want the destruction to be so absolute and so public that he can never show his face in the light of day again. I closed the laptop with a sharp, authoritative snap. Keep monitoring the policies I ordered, looking at the lawyers around the table. Do not let the insurance carriers know we are watching. I need to know exactly when those policies mature and when the payout is scheduled to be triggered. Spencer thinks he is running down the clock on my sister's life. He thinks he is the one holding the stopwatch, but he has absolutely no idea that he is actually running out of time. I stood up from the heavy mahogany table, the cold, hard diamond of my resolve fully set. The trap was built. The evidence was completely secured. Now all I had to do was bait the monster out of his comfortable suburban cave. Vance handed me the final schedule for the insurance policies before I left the room. The maturation dates were perfectly aligned with the rapid escalation of Ayala's symptoms. Spencer had structured the payout triggers to activate in exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks was all the time my sister had left before he administered the final lethal dose of thallium. The ticking clock was deafening in my ears. I had 21 days to dismantle a man who had the entire medical establishment and my own mother fiercely protecting him. But Spencer was not just sitting idle in his suburban mansion. He knew I was a threat after our confrontation in his home office. He knew I had the financial data even if he thought I lacked the physical proof. So he decided to launch a massive preemptive strike. He wanted to destroy my credibility so thoroughly that if I ever went to the police, they would immediately dismiss me as a vindictive liar. It started on a Thursday morning. I was sitting in the back of my chauffeured town car, heading to the Thorn corporate headquarters in the city. My phone began vibrating endlessly. I opened my newsfeed and saw my own face splashed across the front page of a major digital tabloid. The headline was printed in massive, bold letters. Local woman abandons dying sister to marry billionaire sugar daddy. Spencer had weaponized the media against me. The article was a masterclass in character assassination. He had anonymously provided the reporters with carefully curated details of my sudden marriage to Elias. The story painted me as a cold, calculating sociopath who refused to donate a kidney to her beloved sister and instead used the family tragedy as a stepping stone to secure a wealthy husband. There were quotes from anonymous family friends expressing their deep shock and disgust. I knew exactly who those anonymous friends were. It was my mother and Spencer's country club circle. They were feeding the tabloids every single lie he orchestrated. By noon, the smear campaign had gone completely viral. Local news stations picked up the story, framing it as a tragic tale of a devoted husband doing everything he could to save his wife, while her greedy sister ran off with a corporate tycoon. When my car pulled up to the massive glass doors of the Thorn headquarters, a swarm of paparazzi and aggressive reporters were already waiting on the sidewalk. Cameras flashed blindly against the tinted windows of my car. "Madam Chairwoman, we can route the car through the underground parking garage to avoid the press," my driver suggested, looking at me in the rearview mirror. "No," I replied, my voice perfectly calm. "Pull right up to the front doors. Let them take their pictures." The driver nodded and stopped the car right at the curb. My security detail immediately stepped out, forming a protective wall around the passenger door. I stepped out of the vehicle wearing a sharp black tailored suit and dark sunglasses. The reporters surged forward, shouting vicious questions over each other. "Amara, is it true you refused to pay for your sister's medical treatments?" one reporter yelled, shoving a microphone toward my face. "How do you sleep at night knowing your sister is dying while you live in a billionaire estate?" another one screamed. "Did you force Elias Thorne into a marriage to steal his money before he dies of cancer?" A third voice chimed in, completely devoid of basic human decency. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to break down crying or scream in angry defense. They wanted the angry black woman stereotype that would perfectly validate Spencer's carefully constructed narrative. If I tried to defend myself in front of those flashing cameras, I would automatically look guilty. The public court of opinion had already convicted me based on the word of a handsome white executive crying over his sick wife, so I gave them absolutely nothing. I did not frown. I did not smile. I did not speed up my walking pace. I glided past the screaming reporters with the absolute cold detachment of a woman who owned the pavement they were standing on. My silence was a black hole that swallowed their aggressive energy completely whole. I walked through the revolving glass doors of the headquarters, leaving the media circus stranded on the sidewalk. Spencer thought the negative press would break my spirit. He thought the public humiliation would force me into hiding or push me to make a reckless emotional mistake. He did not realize that by putting my face on the news, he was simply giving me the perfect cover. While the entire city was focused on the scandalous gold digger sister, no one was looking at the quiet, complex financial maneuvers happening behind the scenes. I took the private elevator up to the top floor of the Thorne building. The executive suite was completely silent and secure. I walked into my new office and sat down behind the massive desk overlooking the city skyline. I pulled up the Thorne Financial Network and went back to work. Let him talk to the tabloids, I thought, staring at the glowing data streams. Let him build his perfect public pedestal. The higher he climbs, the more bones he will break when I finally drag him down. I sat at my desk and looked at the 3 life insurance policies again. The sheer greed of the $15 million payout was staggering. He had structured these policies so that any death resulting from autoimmune failure would trigger an immediate expedited payout clause. He was planning a quick, clean exit. He would bury my sister, collect the massive checks, and move to an offshore tax haven before anyone even thought to ask a single question. My mother would probably stand right next to him at the funeral, crying on his shoulder, thanking him for making Aaliyah's final days so comfortable. The thought of their disgusting alliance made the blood roar in my ears. But I channeled that rage into pure focus. I could not save Aaliyah by arguing with her. I could only save her by ripping the poison right out of her veins and exposing the monster feeding it to her. I spent the next 48 hours setting the physical traps that would end his life as he knew it. Spencer was relying on his corrupt doctor to write the falsified medical charts, but he still needed a legitimate pharmaceutical supply chain to procure the raw thallium. He was using his position as a regional director to mask the chemical orders as industrial cleaning supplies for his medical warehouses. Using the unlimited capital Elias had provided me, I did not just track his supply chain, I bought it. I authorized the hostile takeover of the specific logistics company Spencer used to move his unregulated materials. It was a small private fleet of delivery trucks and holding facilities that he thought was entirely off the grid. Within 2 days, the Thorne Corporation quietly acquired a controlling stake in the logistics company through a series of anonymous proxy buyers. Spencer was still placing his illegal orders, thinking he was flying under the radar. He had absolutely no idea that he was now submitting those orders directly to me. The 3-week clock was ticking down fast. Aaliyah was fading and Spencer was getting cocky. He was basking in the glow of the sympathetic media coverage, playing the tragic hero for the cameras. But every single move he made was now happening inside a cage that I had built around him. He thought he was the predator hunting my family for a $15 million payday, but he was just a rat wandering blindly into a multi-billion-dollar trap. The final stage was set. I had the financial records, the insurance fraud, and the supply chain under my absolute control. Now I needed the final, undeniable piece of medical evidence. I needed Aaliyah's actual blood, and I was going to get it right under his arrogant nose. But before I could send a medical team into that house, I needed to make sure Spencer and his corrupt doctor had absolutely no way out. They thought they were playing a local game of deception, but I was playing global Monopoly. I sat at my massive desk overlooking the city and opened a secure communication line to the Thorn Corporate Acquisitions team. The men and women on this team were absolute financial predators, and they were now entirely at my command. Spencer was drowning in over $4 million of margin call debt. His primary brokerage firm had been threatening to liquidate his assets for months. In the high-stakes financial world, distressed debt is often sold off to third-party collection agencies for pennies on the dollar. The original broker takes a loss, but gets a guaranteed return, and the aggressive debt collector takes on the risk of squeezing the money out of the desperate debtor. I did not want pennies on the dollar. I wanted total, absolute ownership of Spencer's financial existence. I instructed my acquisitions team to approach his brokerage firm under the guise of a highly aggressive offshore hedge fund. We offered to buy Spencer's entire debt portfolio at full market value. It was an unprecedented offer that no sane financial institution would ever refuse. They were thrilled to dump his toxic assets. Within 24 hours, the heavy ink was dry on the transfer documents. Spencer received a generic automated email from his broker stating that his accounts had been successfully transferred to a new holding company for standard management. He probably sat in his home office and breathed a massive sigh of relief, thinking he had miraculously bought himself more time before his life collapsed. He had absolutely no idea that the anonymous holding company was a direct subsidiary of the Thorn Corporation. I now personally owned every single dollar of his massive debt. I held the primary mortgage on his sprawling suburban mansion. I held the financial liens on his expensive luxury cars. If I simply snapped my fingers, his entire life would be legally repossessed by the end of the business day. He would be thrown out onto the street with absolutely nothing to his name. But I was not ready to snap my fingers just yet. I wanted him to feel completely safe and secure right up until the exact moment I crushed him into dust. With Spencer securely tethered to my desk, I turned my full attention to Dr. Thomas Montgomery. The arrogant concierge physician was the crucial weak link in this murder plot. He was the one falsifying Alea's medical charts and physically supplying the heavy metal poison. Montgomery worked for a highly exclusive private practice called Pinnacle Health Associates. It was a boutique medical group that catered exclusively to wealthy corporate executives and local celebrities charging exorbitant annual retainer fees in exchange for total medical discretion. The senior partners who owned the practice were older doctors looking eagerly toward their luxury retirements. They cared about their quarterly profit margins far more than they cared about the actual ethical practice of medicine. I did not just want to expose Montgomery to the medical board. I wanted to absolutely own his professional license and control his every move. I deployed a team of ruthless corporate litigators to approach the senior partners of Pinnacle Health Associates. We presented them with a massive sudden buyout offer that was easily triple the actual market valuation of their entire medical practice. The only strict stipulation was that the sale had to be executed immediately and quietly, with all current staff contracts and non-disclosure agreements transferring directly to the new corporate ownership board. The greedy senior partners signed the acquisition papers without a single second thought. They took their massive cash payouts and walked away, leaving the entire exclusive medical group under the absolute control of a private healthcare management firm, a shell firm that I had personally created just 3 days prior. Dr. Montgomery woke up the next morning as a standard corporate employee, completely unaware that his new ultimate boss was the angry black woman he had racially insulted over the phone just a few days ago. By legally owning the medical practice, I gained immediate, unrestricted access to every single file on their highly secure internal servers. I bypassed Montgomery's personal administrative passwords and downloaded the completely unredacted version of Alea's medical history. Sitting in my quiet office, I scrolled through the horrifying truth. I saw the fake blood panels he had submitted to the insurance companies to justify the lupus diagnosis. Worse, I found the encrypted digital notes he sent to Spencer, detailing the specific heavy metal dosages required to mimic kidney failure without triggering an immediate fatal cardiac arrest. It was all there, perfectly documented in cold, calculating clinical terminology. I could also see Montgomery's private emails on the company server. He was desperately corresponding with offshore casino hosts, begging for credit extensions and promising massive cash payments by the end of the month. He was relying entirely on Spencer's $15 million life insurance payout to save his own miserable life. The sheer blinding arrogance of these two men was staggering. They had built a heavy fortress of lies using their wealth and their societal privilege as the mortar. They thought they were completely untouchable. But I had just bought the entire fortress right out from under them. I owned Spencer's crippling debt, and I owned Montgomery's medical license. They were now merely desperate puppets dancing on my strings, and I held the scissors. The financial and professional traps were perfectly set and completely inescapable. But none of this brilliant corporate maneuvering would matter in a federal court of law if I could not prove that the thallium was physically circulating inside my sister's body at this very moment. I needed an independent toxicological blood panel verified by an untainted laboratory. And since Aaliyah was essentially being held hostage in that heavily guarded suburban mansion, I had to find a way to get a needle directly into her arm without Spencer or my mother ever suspecting a single thing. I needed an operative who was completely outside of Spencer's corrupt local network. I used the Thorne Medical Division to reach out directly to Johns Hopkins Hospital. We bypassed the standard staffing agencies and hired a highly specialized private trauma nurse named Helen. Helen had spent 20 years working in emergency toxicology and hospice care. She was a woman carved from granite with a no-nonsense demeanor that could intimidate a neurosurgeon. I met her in a secure boardroom and told her exactly what I suspected was happening to my sister. I handed her a briefcase containing $250,000 in cash and a secure specialized blood collection kit. Her mission was simple. She had to get inside that heavily guarded house, draw 2 vials of blood, and walk out before Spencer realized he had been played. To get Helen through the front door, I used the newly acquired Pinnacle Health Associates server. I had my corporate legal team draft a highly complex official-looking mandate from Spencer's own insurance provider. The document stated that due to Aaliyah's rapid decline, a mandatory independent hospice evaluation was required to approve the final tier of palliative care funding. If he refused the evaluation, the insurance company would immediately freeze all current medical payouts and launch a full audit of her case. It was the perfect bait. Spencer was terrified of audits and desperate to keep the insurance money flowing so he could maintain his cover story. When Dr. Montgomery's office sent him the notification, he did not argue. He scheduled the home visit for the very next morning. He thought this was just another bureaucratic hurdle he had to jump before Aaliyah died, and he collected his $15 million. Helen arrived at the suburban mansion at exactly 9 in the morning. I sat in my black SUV parked 3 blocks away, listening to the live audio feed from a microscopic microphone hidden inside her uniform collar. The audio was crystal clear. I heard the heavy front door open, and I heard Spencer's voice dripping with fake exhaustion as he welcomed her inside. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Nurse Spencer sighed heavily. "My mother-in-law and I are just so overwhelmed." "Aaliyah had a terrible night. The pain is just unimaginable." "I understand, Mr. Spencer," Helen replied, her voice flat and perfectly professional. "The transition to end-of-life hospice care is always difficult for the family. I need to conduct a standard physical assessment and draw a baseline metabolic panel to determine her current organ function. This will help us calibrate her final pain management protocols." I heard my mother chime in from the background. Her voice was tight with nervous energy. "Why do you need more blood?" she asked. "Dr. Montgomery just ran a full panel last week. We already know her kidneys are failing. Why put her through more pain?" Insurance regulations, Mom Helen stated coldly, offering absolutely no room for debate. Independent baseline verification is required before releasing federal hospice funds. If you prefer to decline the assessment, I can notify the underwriter that the family is assuming full financial liability for her remaining care. No, no, that is fine, Spencer interrupted quickly, cutting my mother off. We want to comply fully. Please do whatever you need to do to make her comfortable. I listened as Helen walked down the hallway and entered the sterile medical room in the east wing. I heard the soft hum of the medical machines. Aaliyah moaned quietly. The sound of my sister's weak, broken voice sent a fresh wave of blinding rage through my chest. But I forced myself to take a slow, deep breath. Helen did not hesitate. She asked Spencer and my mother to step out into the hallway to fill out a thick stack of complex legal privacy forms. It was a classic distraction technique. Spencer, eager to lock in his insurance approval, stepped out of the room and closed the door, taking my mother with him. Helen had exactly 3 minutes. I listened to the rustle of sterile packaging. I heard Helen speak softly to my sister. "Just a small pinch, honey," Helen whispered. "You are doing so well." I heard the distinct pop of a vacuum-sealed blood collection tube. Then another. It was happening right under the roof of his massive house. Spencer was standing just a few feet away, completely oblivious to the fact that the actual instrument of his destruction was currently filling with dark red liquid inside his own guest room. "All done," Helen said cheerfully. She packed the vials into the secure thermal lockbox in her medical bag. I heard the bedroom door open again. Spencer and my mother walked back in, handing over the completed paperwork. "She is very weak, Mr. Spencer," Helen said, her tone shifting to offer the exact sympathetic validation he craved. "You are doing a wonderful job keeping her comfortable. The lab results will be uploaded to the insurance portal within 48 hours. "Thank you," Nurse Spencer replied, his voice sounding genuinely relieved. "We are just trying to survive each day." I listened as Helen walked out the front door and down the driveway. She got into her unmarked car and drove directly to our designated meeting point at a secure private airfield just outside the city. I was waiting on the tarmac. Helen stepped out of her vehicle and handed me the thermal lockbox without a single word. I handed her the briefcase of cash. She nodded once, got back into her car, and disappeared. I boarded a private Thorn corporate jet. We did not use a local lab in the city where Spencer or Montgomery might have connections. I flew the blood samples directly to a highly secure independent toxicology laboratory in Massachusetts, a facility that handled extreme forensic cases for federal intelligence agencies. I sat in the sterile waiting room of the lab for 6 agonizing hours. Every time the clock ticked, I thought about Aaliyah lying in that cold bed, completely unaware that the man holding her hand was slowly murdering her. Finally, the lead toxicologist walked into the waiting room, holding a thick manila folder. He looked deeply disturbed. He handed me the file and sat down in the chair across from me. "I do not know who this patient is, Madam Chairwoman," he said, his voice completely serious. "But they need to be extracted and placed in an intensive care unit immediately. The blood panel shows absolutely zero inflammatory markers for lupus. Her immune system is actually completely normal, but her heavy metal toxicity is off the charts." I opened the folder and stared at the bold black numbers printed on the official laboratory letterhead. The thallium levels in her blood were categorized as lethal. The toxicologist explained that the poison was being administered in highly calculated microdoses. It was just enough to steadily destroy her nervous system and simulate organ failure, but carefully metered to prevent a sudden suspicious death. It was the work of someone with a deep understanding of human pharmacology. I traced my finger over the red highlighted numbers on the page. This was it. This was the undeniable physical proof. It was not a theory about missing money or offshore accounts. It was the actual murder weapon, documented, certified, and completely legally binding. I closed the folder and stood up from the waiting room chair. The cold ice in my veins had completely frozen over. Spencer had his fake medical charts, and his $15 million insurance policies. He had my brainwashed sister and my status-obsessed mother. He had the entire suburban neighborhood convinced he was a tragic hero. But I had his debt, I had his doctor, and now I had his death sentence printed neatly on a piece of paper. The trap was fully loaded. It was time to invite the monster to his own execution. The thick manila folder holding my sister's toxicology report was still sitting on my desk when my assistant walked into the office. She was holding a thick cream-colored envelope with elegant gold foil lettering on the front. It had been hand-delivered to the Thorne corporate headquarters security desk just an hour ago. I took the envelope from her and slid my silver letter opener through the heavy paper. Inside was a formal invitation printed on expensive cardstock. Spencer was hosting a massive high society event called the Alia's Hope Fundraising Gala. The venue was the grand ballroom of the most expensive luxury hotel in the downtown financial district. The guest list included local politicians, wealthy socialites, corporate executives, and most importantly, every major local news outlet and tabloid journalist in the city. He was pulling out all the stops for a spectacular public performance. I read the detailed itinerary printed on the back of the invitation. The main event of the evening was a keynote speech delivered by Spencer himself. I knew exactly what he was planning to do with that microphone. This gala was not about raising money for medical research or helping my sister. It was the grand finale of his twisted theatrical production. He was going to stand up in front of the cameras, shedding his perfect crocodile tears, and officially announce that Aaliyah was no longer responding to the experimental treatments. He was going to tell the world that they were transitioning her to end-of-life hospice care. In the medical and insurance world, moving a patient to hospice is the ultimate administrative death sentence. It means the doctors have officially given up and all life-saving interventions are completely withdrawn. Once Aaliyah was placed in a hospice facility under Dr. Montgomery's direct supervision, Spencer could administer the final lethal dose of thallium without anyone batting an eye. The insurance companies would simply view it as the natural, tragic conclusion of her long battle with lupus. The $15 million payout would be authorized immediately. But the gala served a second, much darker purpose for him. By inviting the media, he was setting the stage to publicly shame me one last time. He wanted to solidify his narrative as the devoted white savior husband who fought until the bitter end, while painting me as the heartless, wealthy sister who abandoned her family for a billionaire. He sent me the invitation because he wanted me to show up. He wanted me to sit in the back of the room looking guilty and ashamed while society applauded his sacrifice and condemned my selfishness. He thought he was luring me into the ultimate social trap. I set the cream-colored invitation down next to the terrifying toxicology report. A slow, cold smile crept across my face. Spencer was incredibly predictable. His absolute narcissism required a massive audience for his final victory lap. He had built the perfect stage for his own glorious coronation. He had absolutely no idea he had actually built the perfect scaffold for his own public execution. I did not waste any time feeling angry. I had 48 hours to finalize the logistical nightmare of taking down a wealthy executive in a room full of powerful people. I called Vance, my lead corporate attorney, and instructed him to contact his high-level federal connections. We could not leave anything to chance. Spencer had private security guards at his house and hotel security at the gala. If we just walked in there and accused him, he would use his wealth to have us thrown out before the police even arrived. We needed overwhelming federal authority. Vance used Elias Thorne's massive political influence to bypass the standard bureaucratic delays. He placed a direct call to the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. When a multi-billion-dollar corporate entity hands you a fully documented case of federal insurance fraud, wire fraud, and attempted murder, complete with independent lab results, you do not wait to get a warrant. You mobilize your best agents immediately. The plan was complex but perfectly synchronized. While I was walking into the grand ballroom to confront Spencer face to face, the federal strike team would simultaneously secure the perimeter of the hotel to ensure he could not slip out a back exit. At the exact same moment, a secondary tactical unit accompanied by Helen and her medical extraction team would breach Spencer's suburban mansion. Their job was to secure my sister and arrest Dr. Montgomery, who was scheduled to be there monitoring her condition. When the evening of the gala finally arrived, I stood in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling mirror in my private suite at the Thorne estate. I was not going to wear black. Black was a color of mourning, of defeat, and of quiet submission. I was not attending a funeral. I was attending a slaughter. I reached into my massive closet and pulled out a custom-tailored power suit. It was a brilliant, striking shade of blood red. The sharp lines of the blazer and the perfect cut of the trousers made me look like a walking weapon. I paired it with incredibly high stiletto heels that clicked against the hardwood floor like the cocking of a loaded gun. I pulled my dark hair back into a tight, severe style and applied a deep crimson lipstick that matched the suit perfectly. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The angry, marginalized sister who used to beg for crumbs of affection from her toxic family was completely dead and gone. The woman staring back at me was the chairwoman of a multi-billion-dollar empire. She was cold, ruthless, and entirely out of patience. My chauffeured black Maybach pulled up to the glittering entrance of the luxury hotel right at 8 o'clock. The sidewalk was completely swarmed with paparazzi reporters and wealthy guests arriving in their expensive gowns and tuxedos. The flashing lights of the cameras illuminated the night sky like a chaotic thunderstorm. My security detail stepped out first, securing the perimeter around the vehicle. The heavy passenger door opened and I stepped out onto the red carpet. The bright blood-red color of my suit instantly caught the attention of every single camera in the vicinity. A massive wave of flashing bulbs erupted around me. Reporters began shouting my name, screaming questions about my dying sister and my billionaire husband. Amara. "Are you here to apologize to Spencer?" someone yelled from the crowd. "How do you feel knowing your sister is going into hospice?" Another voice shrieked. I did not flinch. I did not look at them. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead, my face a perfect mask of impenetrable ice. I walked up the carpeted steps and pushed through the heavy glass doors of the hotel, entering the opulent lobby. The faint sound of classical string music echoed from the grand ballroom down the hall. Spencer was in there, holding court, soaking in the adoration of his wealthy peers. The trap was perfectly set. It was time to step inside and lock the door behind me. I walked slowly down the long corridor leading to the grand ballroom. The thick carpet absorbed the sound of my heels, giving me a few final moments of absolute silence before the storm. As I approached the heavy mahogany doors, the classical music faded and was replaced by the amplified sound of Spencer's voice echoing through the sound system. I stopped just outside the doors and listened. He was laying it on incredibly thick. His voice was trembling with manufactured grief. "We have tried absolutely everything," Spencer said, his voice echoing through the massive room. "The doctors have exhausted every single experimental treatment available. But the lupus is just too aggressive. My beautiful wife, my Aliyah, is fading away from me." I could hear the collective sympathetic murmur of the wealthy audience. I pictured my mother sitting in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, completely captivated by his performance. "It has been the hardest 8 months of my life," Spencer continued, pausing perfectly to let a fake sob escape his lips. "I have not slept. I have depleted my resources. And I have prayed every single night for a miracle. But sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go." In consultation with Dr. Montgomery, we have made the agonizing decision to transition Aliyah to end-of-life hospice care tomorrow morning. I want to thank all of you for supporting us, especially when certain members of our own family decided to abandon us in our darkest hour. The subtle dig at me hung in the air, drawing a quiet gasp of judgment from the crowd. He was playing them perfectly. weaving his victimhood and my vilification into one seamless narrative. A heavy hand touched my shoulder. I turned and saw Special Agent Harris standing right behind me. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a dark tactical windbreaker with the bold yellow letters of the FBI printed across the back. Behind him stood 12 fully armed federal agents, their faces grim and professional. Flanking them was Helen, the trauma nurse from Johns Hopkins, along with a specialized rapid response medical extraction team carrying emergency oxygen and stretcher equipment. "We have the perimeter secured, Madam Chairwoman," Agent Harris whispered quietly. "The local police have blocked the streets outside. No one is leaving this building. The secondary tactical unit is currently breaching the suburban house to secure your sister and detain Dr. Montgomery. We are ready on your command." I took one final deep breath. The cold ice in my veins solidified. I reached out and placed my hands flat against the polished wood of the heavy ballroom doors. "Now," I said. I pushed the doors forward with all my strength. The heavy brass hinges let out a loud, sharp groan as the doors flew open and slammed violently against the interior walls. The loud crashing sound echoed through the cavernous ballroom, instantly cutting off the sympathetic murmurs of the crowd. Every single head in the room whipped around. A collective gasp of pure shock rippled through the hundreds of wealthy guests seated at the circular dining tables. I stepped into the threshold, the bright spotlights catching the brilliant blood-red fabric of my suit. I did not hesitate. I began marching straight down the center aisle, my high heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. The visual contrast was absolute. I was a striking symbol of lethal authority, cutting through a sea of muted formal wear and polite society. But the audience was not just staring at me. They were staring at the terrifying force marching directly behind me. The elite medical extraction team moved in perfect unison, pushing their emergency equipment down the aisle. And branching out on either side of me, the squad of armed federal agents fanned out across the room. They moved with terrifying speed, securing the emergency exits and standing at strict attention along the walls. The sheer magnitude of the interruption completely paralyzed the room. Wealthy socialites dropped their champagne glasses. Local politicians froze in their seats. The air was suddenly thick with panic and confusion. The media photographers who had been invited to document my disgrace instinctively raised their cameras. The rapid flashing of camera lenses lit up the room as they realized the story had just drastically changed. I kept my eyes locked on the stage. Spencer was standing behind the clear acrylic podium, gripping the edges so hard his knuckles were completely white. The fake tears had instantly vanished from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. His jaw was slightly slack and his eyes darted frantically from the federal agents to the medical team and finally landing on me. My mother jumped up from her seat in the front row. Her face was flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "Amara, what on earth are you doing?" she shrieked, her voice breaking the stunned silence of the room. "How dare you ruin this event? Have you lost your absolute mind? Security, get her out of here immediately." Agent Harris stepped forward and simply pointed a stern finger at my mother. "Mom, sit down and remain silent," he ordered, his voice booming with federal authority. "This is an active federal investigation. Anyone who interferes will be immediately detained and charged with obstruction." My mother gasped and fell back into her chair, her hands covering her mouth in absolute shock. She looked around the room, realizing that her country club friends were watching her perfect family image completely disintegrate in real time. I did not look at her. I did not care about her embarrassment or her fragile ego. I continued my march until I reached the very edge of the stage. I slowly walked up the short flight of stairs and stepped onto the platform. Spencer took a step backward, knocking over his glass of water on the podium. He tried to quickly regain his composure, pulling the microphone closer to his mouth. He thought he could still control the room. He thought his white privilege could still talk his way out of the trap. "Amara, this is insane," Spencer said, his voice echoing through the speakers, trying to sound authoritative but failing to hide the violent tremor in his chest. You are having a severe mental breakdown. You cannot just hire fake security guards to storm a private charity event because you are jealous of my marriage. I am calling the real police right now to have you removed. He reached into his expensive tuxedo pocket for his phone, his hands shaking uncontrollably. They are the real police. Spencer, I said, my voice perfectly calm, carrying clearly across the silent ballroom without a microphone. And they are not here for me. I walked right up to the podium. The height difference between us no longer mattered. He was towering over me, but he looked incredibly small and pathetic. I reached out and wrapped my hand around the neck of the microphone, slowly pulling it away from him. He was so paralyzed by the reality of the federal agents surrounding the stage that he simply let it go. I turned to face the hundreds of wealthy guests, the local media and the flashing cameras of the tabloids that he had specifically invited to document my downfall. They were all watching, holding their breath, waiting for the angry black woman to start screaming hysterically. I did not scream. I pulled a sleek silver remote control from my blazer pocket and pointed it at the massive projection screen hanging directly behind the stage. The screen had been displaying a beautiful, tragic slideshow of my sister smiling in her hospital bed, designed to pull money out of the audience. I pressed the button. The beautiful slideshow instantly vanished. I looked back at Spencer. His eyes were wide with pure panic. He finally realized that the cage was completely locked. He had built the stage, he had invited the audience, and he had willingly handed me the microphone. Now it was time to let the whole world see exactly what a monster looked like when the lights were finally turned on. I pressed the button a second time. The massive projection screen behind the stage flickered, and a stark white document appeared. It was not a medical chart or a heartfelt photo. It was the independent toxicology report from the Massachusetts laboratory. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice was steady and cut through the dead silence of the room like a scalpel. Take a good look at the screen, everyone, I said calmly. That is my sister's actual blood work, taken just yesterday morning by the specialized nurse standing right over there. There are absolutely no markers for lupus in her system. None. What you are looking at highlighted in red are lethal levels of thallium, a highly toxic heavy metal. My sister is not dying of an autoimmune disease. She is being systematically poisoned to death by the man standing right next to me. The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of gasps and terrified whispers. Spencer lunged forward, his face pale and sweating. "This is a lie," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She fabricated this. She is a jealous psychopath. Somebody get her off this stage." I pressed the button again. The screen shifted to display the 3 life insurance policies. 3 active policies, Spencer, I continued, my voice echoing loudly over his frantic denials, totaling $15 million, all set to pay out the moment my sister finally succumbs to her tragic illness. And look very closely at the signatures, ladies and gentlemen. They are clumsy, pathetic forgeries. My sister never signed these documents because she never knew they existed. I pressed the remote one final time. The audio recording of Dr. Montgomery played over the massive ballroom speakers. The arrogant, condescending voice filled the room, accompanied by the distinct chiming of high-stakes casino slot machines in the background. The crowd listened in absolute horror as the corrupt concierge doctor dismissed me and protected Spencer, all while gambling away millions of dollars in offshore debt. Spencer realized the narrative was completely dead. The white savior mask shattered into a million pieces. He turned his panicked eyes to the hotel security guard standing near the exits. "Get her out of here!" he bellowed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "I am calling my corporate board of directors. I am going to sue you, Amara. I will take every single penny you got from that dying old man. I will destroy you." I turned to face him fully. I looked him up and down, taking in his messy hair, his sweat-stained tuxedo, and his trembling hands. I smiled. It was a cold, empty smile that did not reach my eyes. "Do not bother calling your corporate board, Spencer," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that commanded the entire room. "I bought your offshore debt last week. And this morning, the Thorne Corporation officially acquired 51% of your medical supply company. I am your board of directors. You are fired. Your personal assets are completely frozen. And you are going to federal prison." I stepped back and nodded to Special Agent Harris. The federal agents swarmed the stage. They grabbed Spencer's arms, twisting them roughly behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoed over the sound system. Spencer began to sob. Real, ugly, terrified sobs. He begged and pleaded as they dragged him off the stage and walked him right past my mother, who was sitting frozen in her chair, her face buried in her hands. She was watching her perfect social status, her wealthy white son-in-law, and her entire suburban delusion being dragged away in chains. The aftermath was swift and entirely merciless. Spencer's high-priced defense attorneys took one look at the mountain of federal evidence, the toxicology reports, the forged signatures, and the casino money trail, and advised him to take a plea deal. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in a federal penitentiary for insurance fraud and attempted murder. Dr. Montgomery lost his medical license and received 15 years. Aaliyah was rushed to Johns Hopkins that very night. The medical extraction team initiated an aggressive heavy metal detox protocol. She survived. Her organs were permanently damaged and her hair was gone, but she lived. However, the psychological damage was absolute. Waking up in a hospital bed and realizing that the perfect husband she worshipped had been slowly feeding her poison for 8 months completely shattered her reality. She asked to see me once. I paid for her medical care out of a blind trust, but I did not visit her room. My job was to save her life, not to rebuild her broken mind. She had made her choice when she threw those papers in my face, and I was done setting myself on fire to keep her warm. Without Spencer's stolen money, my mother's pristine suburban life collapsed overnight. The bank which I now owned foreclosed on the massive mansion. She was expelled from her elite country club. The anonymous friends who had fed lies to the tabloids stopped returning her calls. She lost the only thing she truly valued. 3 weeks later, my chauffeured Maybach stopped at the heavy wrought iron gates of the Thorne estate. I was sitting in the back seat reviewing a corporate merger file when I saw her. My mother was standing outside the gates in the freezing rain, looking old and worn down. She tapped desperately on the tinted glass of my window, crying and begging for me to let her in. She wanted to apologize. She wanted my protection now that I was the only source of wealth left in the family. I pressed the button and the thick window rolled down just a few inches. The cold rain blew into the luxurious car. "Amara, please," she sobbed, clutching her soaking wet coat. "I was wrong. I am so sorry. I have nowhere else to go. Please let me come inside." I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like I was nothing. I did not feel anger. I just felt nothing. "You chose him," I said, my voice completely flat. "Now live with it." I pushed the button and the window rolled up smoothly, shutting out her cries and the sound of the falling rain. The driver pulled the car forward, leaving her standing alone in the street. I had officially established total, absolute no contact. The toxic cord was permanently severed. 2 months later, Elias Thorne passed away peacefully in his sleep. There were no fake tears at his funeral. Just the quiet, profound respect of an empire saying goodbye to its founder. The next morning, I walked into the massive glass boardroom at the top of the Thorne corporate headquarters. I wore a sharp black suit and took my seat at the very head of the long mahogany table. I was no longer the unloved daughter or the discarded scapegoat. I was the chairwoman of a global syndicate. I was the empress of my own empire. Sometimes family is not a safe haven. It is the anchor trying to drag you to the bottom of the ocean. Have you ever had to walk away from your own blood to save yourself? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of surviving the unimaginable. Thank you for listening.